Emily Carter was sitting on the edge of her bed, fingers frozen above her laptop keyboard, staring at the unfinished letter she had been trying, and failing, to write to Ryan, the one person who still lived in the back of her heart no matter how much she tried to outgrow him. The late afternoon light slanted through her window, turning the posters, the books, and the small paintings she had made of the Washington coastline into quiet reminders of everything she had dreamed of before life grew heavy. She had been telling herself she would finally make a decision today, finally send the letter, finally choose something for herself instead of staying still, but the moment she tried to type her thoughts, her mind drifted, floating somewhere between fear and longing. That was when she heard the knock, soft, gentle, almost too polite, and so unlike the hurried taps she remembered from childhood, that it made her sit up straight, heart suddenly thumping as if she knew instinctively that something important was coming. Her father's voice called, calm but carrying a strange weight, like he had been practicing this moment in his head. She told him to come in, and when he stepped inside, she saw right away that this wasn't just a casual conversation. Michael Carter didn't rush, didn't look nervous, but there was a depth in his eyes that made her chest tighten. He walked slowly toward her desk chair, his hands tucked into his pockets like he was trying to keep himself steady. Emily pushed her laptop closed, suddenly feeling like her whole room had shifted into a stage, and she wasn't prepared for the scene. Her father glanced around her room, the neatly arranged books, the old guitar she rarely touched anymore, the photos taped on her wall from college days when life felt wide and open and she had believed New York would someday be her home. His eyes lingered on everything with a softness she couldn't understand, and then he turned back to her, letting out a breath that sounded almost like surrender. He said quietly, "Can we talk for a moment?" She nodded, though her stomach twisted with a strange mix of fear and curiosity. He sat down, leaning forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees like he was grounding himself, and when he finally looked up, his expression held something she had never seen before, something tender, honest, and slightly afraid. "I need to ask you something," he said, and Emily felt her pulse jump. Then, with the calmest voice she had ever heard from him, he asked, "Are you truly happy here, or are you staying because of me?" The words fell between them like cold air, sharp and quiet, making her freeze before she even understood why. She blinked, unable to speak, because the question wasn't just a question, it was a mirror held up to everything she had been ignoring. Her father didn't rush her. He just watched her, his expression steady but full of unspoken truth. He continued softly, explaining that he had noticed how she avoided talking about her dreams, how she no longer painted like she used to, how she skipped opportunities she once fought hard for. He reminded her how she had gotten accepted into an art program in New York, how she once talked for hours about building a life of her own, how she used to smile differently when she mentioned Ryan back when they were inseparable. But somewhere along the way, after her mother passed, after the house felt heavier, after he started relying on her more than he realized, she stopped choosing herself. Emily felt her throat close, because every word he spoke was true, and hearing it from him made it impossible to hide behind excuses. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked, and all she could manage was a whisper, "I don't know what I want anymore." Her father nodded gently, as though he had expected that answer, and the kindness in his eyes made her want to cry. He told her that he had been replaying memories in his mind, teaching her to ride a bike, watching her practice guitar for school. Talent shows, helping her pack for college, and he realized that somewhere along the way, he had held on to her too tightly, afraid of losing the last piece of family that made the house feel alive. He said he didn't want her to feel trapped by love, responsibility, or guilt. She deserved more than a life half-lived. He deserved to see her build the future she had once promised herself. Emily felt something break open inside her, a mix of relief and ache, because for the first time in a long time, someone was giving her permission to want more. The air in the room felt thick with everything they hadn't said for years. She looked down at her hands, noticing how tightly she had been gripping her phone. As if the universe decided the moment wasn't emotional enough, her phone buzzed in her lap. She glanced down and saw his name, Ryan. Her heart kicked. Her dad noticed her reaction but didn't pry. Instead, he gave her a small, knowing smile, the kind only a parent could give, the kind that said he understood more than she realized. Emily didn't open the message. She couldn't. Not yet. She looked back at her dad, trying to find words for the heaviness and hope she felt swirling through her chest, but he stood slowly, smoothing the front of his shirt before speaking again. He told her gently that he had asked the question not to push her away but to make sure she didn't hold herself back. He reminded her that she had a whole world waiting for her, dreams, chances, people, and she didn't need to stay stuck just because life got hard. He walked to the door, pausing with a soft, reassuring expression that made her heart ache. "Think about it," he said. "Really think about what you want." And as he stepped out of the room, Emily sat frozen on her bed, staring at her phone, her chest rising and falling too fast, wondering why her father's calm question felt like the start of everything she had avoided, her past, her future, and maybe even the person waiting for her outside her comfort zone. Emily sat in silence after her father's question, feeling the weight of her own heartbeat as Michael Carter settled into the chair across from her, looking calmer than she felt. His calmness didn't make things easier, it made them sharper, clearer, harder to escape. He wasn't angry, upset, or emotional, he was simply honest, and that honesty left her feeling exposed. He told her he had noticed how she had been holding herself back, how she had grown quieter over the months, how she avoided talking about her dreams the way she used to. He said he remembered the girl who once filled this room with sketches, colors, and plans, the girl who stayed up late imagining life in New York with a spark in her eyes. But now, that spark felt dim, buried under responsibility. Emily tried to speak, but her voice failed her. She didn't want to admit she felt lost. She didn't want to tell him that staying felt safer than trying again. She didn't want him to know she had stopped choosing herself because she was scared, scared of failure, scared of change, scared of waking old feelings she had tried so hard to ignore. Michael leaned forward, voice soft but steady, telling her he had been thinking a lot about the years after her mother passed, how everything changed, how the house grew heavier, and how he leaned on her more than he realized. He didn't blame her for staying, but he hated the idea that she stayed out of obligation. He told her she deserved to live her own life, not the version of life she thought he needed. His words hit her like a truth she'd been running from. She had become the one who fixed things, the one who held everything together, but she had forgotten how to hold herself. She nodded slowly, tears pushing behind her eyes, admitting that she didn't know what she wanted anymore. Her father didn't rush to comfort her, he just let the truth sit in the room between them, giving her space to feel it. He reminded her that it was okay not to know, that being unsure didn't mean she had failed, it only meant she was human. He said life wasn't meant to be paused out of fear. Emily looked at him then, noticing how tired he seemed, tired but proud of her, proud that she existed in his world. She realized he wasn't trying to push her away. He was trying to set her free. Suddenly her phone buzzed again on the bed beside her, and Emily felt her stomach twist when she saw Ryan's name flash on the screen. She didn't open the message, but the sight of his name sent a spark of emotion she had been trying to bury for months. Her father didn't need to ask who it was, he simply saw the look on her face and understood. He took a slow breath and told her gently that sometimes the things or people we try to push away still find their way back because they matter. He wasn't telling her to run to Ryan, but he was telling her not to close the door just because she was afraid. Emily felt something shift inside her, a mix of fear, hope, and confusion so strong it made her chest feel tight. She didn't know if she was ready to face Ryan, ready to face her old dreams, or ready to step into the life she once wanted. But for the first time, she felt like she wasn't carrying the weight alone. Her father stood slowly, giving her a small smile that held more understanding than words ever could. He told her she didn't have to decide everything today, but she did have to start being honest with herself. He reminded her that she wasn't stuck, she was just scared, and fear wasn't a reason to waste her life. When he walked toward the door, he paused, turned back, and said, "You're allowed to choose your own happiness, Emily. Don't forget that." Then he stepped out of the room, leaving her alone with the silence, the message waiting on her phone, and a heart full of questions she could no longer avoid. As the door clicked shut, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense that everything was about to change, Whether she was ready or not, Emily stayed on her bed after her father left, trying to calm her breathing, but part of her knew the moment wasn't over, it was only shifting. When Michael walked back into the room a few minutes later, he wasn't carrying sadness or worry, he was carrying something deeper, something she didn't expect, truth he had kept quiet for years. He sat down again, slower this time, as if choosing every movement carefully. The fading sunlight hit his face, making him look older, gentler, and suddenly Emily felt like a child again, waiting to hear something she was never supposed to hear. Michael told her he had been thinking a lot about the past, especially her mother's last days, and the promises they made in quiet hospital rooms. He explained that one night, when Emily had gone home to rest, her mother held his hand and said something he never told Emily because he didn't want to influence her choices. But now, he felt she deserved to know. With a slow breath, he told her that her mother had whispered, "Promise me she won't stay small just because she loves us." Emily froze. She had no air left. The idea that her mother spoke about her dreams even in her final moments hit her like an invisible wave, soft but strong enough to shake her. Her father looked down, admitting he hadn't known how to share that without making her feel pressured, so he kept it inside, hoping she would chase her dreams naturally. But over time, he realized she wasn't chasing anything, she was standing still, afraid she would lose him the way she lost her mother. Emily felt tears run down her face before she even realized she was crying. Her father continued, telling her how proud he was of her strength, how she stepped into roles she was never meant to fill, how she became everything he needed after her mother passed. But somewhere in all that responsibility, she lost the version of herself who believed in adventure, art, love, and life outside the walls of this house. Michael's voice stayed calm, but his eyes softened with every word as he admitted he didn't want that for her anymore. He didn't want to look back years from now knowing she stayed because she felt guilty. He wanted her to know she was allowed to choose her own happiness without carrying his. Emily sat completely still, feeling her heart ache in a new way, not from burden, but from release. Her father wasn't chaining her here. She had chained herself. And now he was gently removing the chain. As she tried to process everything, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Ryan. The room felt too small for all the emotions layering over each other, her mother's words, her father's honesty, her own fear, and now this sudden interruption from someone she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Her father glanced at the phone, then at her, and instead of asking questions, he only smiled softly, as though life finally made sense to him. He told her that he knew she and Ryan had a complicated past, but he also knew the way she used to talk about him, bright, shy, hopeful. He wasn't telling her to run back to Ryan, only reminding her that some people leave a mark for a reason. Emily didn't respond. She couldn't. Everything inside her felt loud and quiet at the same time. She felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, not knowing whether she was supposed to jump or step back. She whispered that she didn't know if she was strong enough to change anything. Her father reached out and held her hand gently, a rare gesture that immediately made her eyes sting again. He told her strength didn't mean being fearless, it meant moving even with fear. He said she had already survived harder days, days filled with hospitals, loss, silence, and she didn't owe the world any more suffering. She only owed herself a chance. Emily wanted to argue, wanted to say she wasn't ready, but the truth was she didn't even know what being ready meant anymore. She felt the weight of her father's words pressing into the quiet air, reshaping the way she saw her life. She looked at the painting on her wall, the one she made after her mother passed. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of emotion, full of her. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped painting, stopped dreaming, stopped believing she deserved more. Her father stood slowly, giving her space, but he paused at the door again, the same way he always did when she was younger and scared of storms. He told her that nothing was final, nothing was decided, but the moment she chose herself, no matter what direction she took, he would stand behind her. Then he stepped out again, leaving her alone with the truth he had carried for years and the message she still hadn't opened. Emily stared at her phone, feeling like her life had just shifted from quiet survival to something bigger, something she didn't understand yet but couldn't ignore anymore. Her heart raced, her mind raced, and for the first time, she felt the edge of possibility rising around her. She didn't know what would happen next. But she knew something had already begun to change. Emily sat in her room after her father left, feeling like every part of her life had been quietly rearranged without her permission. The silence around her felt different now, less heavy, more open, like a door had been left halfway unlocked. She stared at her phone, still showing Ryan's name on the screen, and her heart beat faster without asking her first. She didn't know if she was ready to talk to him, or even ready to face the version of herself she used to be when they were close, but something inside her whispered that she couldn't keep hiding from everything forever. She opened the message slowly, breathing too fast as she read the simple words Ryan had sent, "I need to see you." It wasn't dramatic, but it landed in her chest like a spark. Emily stared at the message, trying to make sense of why it hit her so strongly. She told herself it didn't mean anything, that it was probably just him wanting to talk, but her heart refused to believe that. Her father's words were still echoing in her mind, "Choose for your heart, not for fear," and suddenly, she didn't know which feeling she was supposed to follow. She typed back slowly, hands shaking, just one word, "When?" She held her breath, unsure if she wanted him to reply quickly or not at all. Then her phone buzzed again before she could even set it down. Tonight, the new message read. "I'm outside." Emily's breath caught. She froze at the edge of her bed, staring at the glowing screen as if it had changed the rules of her entire world. Outside? Here? Now? She didn't know whether to panic or run to the window, but her body made the choice for her. She stood up so fast her knees trembled. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm, too full of emotions she wasn't prepared to face all at once. She walked toward the window with slow, careful steps, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it belonged to someone else. The quiet street outside looked the same as always, calm, a few porch lights glowing in the early evening, the occasional car passing in the distance, but knowing Ryan was somewhere outside turned everything into a story she wasn't ready to read. She didn't open the curtains yet. She couldn't. Instead, she leaned her forehead against the cool glass and closed her eyes, trying to steady herself. Why now? Why today? Why moments after her father told her to choose her life instead of hiding from it? Part of her wondered if this was a coincidence, but another part, the part she tried to silence, felt like this was the moment she had been avoiding for months. She thought about Ryan's laugh, the long drives they used to take, the late-night phone calls when they were younger and too honest for their own good. She thought about how things fell apart, how silence replaced everything, how she convinced herself she was better off letting him go. But now he was outside her house, and she didn't know if it was fate or timing or just life being unpredictable. Emily touched the window frame, feeling her hands shake. If she stepped out of her room now, things would change. If she didn't, then everything stayed the same, and she knew the same wasn't working anymore. She heard soft footsteps in the hallway. Her father's pause outside her door made her turn around. He didn't come in this time, he simply asked, in a calm, warm voice, "You okay?" Emily swallowed hard and nodded, even though she knew he couldn't see her. But something about his presence made her feel grounded, less scared of the world waiting outside her room. He didn't push, didn't ask why she was pacing, and didn't mention the messages he had seen earlier. Instead, he said something that made her chest warm and heavy at the same time, "Whatever you choose tonight, Em, it's your choice. Not mine. Not anyone else's." And then he walked away, leaving her with the kind of quiet support only a father could give. She exhaled slowly, finally pulling the curtain aside. Her eyes found a familiar figure standing near the streetlight, hands in his pockets, head tilted slightly like he wasn't sure if he should knock or leave. Ryan. Older than the last time she saw him, but still unmistakably him. Emily didn't know how long she stood there, staring. She didn't know if she was ready for whatever conversation waited outside. But she did know something had shifted, inside her room, inside her heart, maybe inside her entire future. She stepped back from the window and wiped her eyes. When she reached for her door, her hand shook again, but she didn't pull away. She had a choice now, one that had been waiting quietly for months. With a deep breath, she opened the door, knowing that the moment she stepped into the hallway, everything in her life might change. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like running from it. The last bell of the day rang through Westfield High, and the classroom emptied quickly as students rushed into the hallway, laughing, calling to friends, and disappearing into the noise like they always did. But Lila noticed something different the moment she stood up from her desk. Ethan, the classmate everyone knew for his easy smile and loud friends, was still sitting in his chair, staring at his notebook even though it was already closed, his shoulders slightly tense, his expression unreadable, and for some reason that small detail caught her attention like a tiny thread pulling her backward. She hesitated near the door, wondering why he wasn't moving, because Ethan never stayed behind, not once the entire semester. But today he looked almost frozen in place, as if he was waiting for something he didn't know how to reach for, and though Lila usually avoided lingering around people, she felt a strange pull to stay, a quiet curiosity mixed with concern that made her feet feel heavier than usual. She tried to act natural as she adjusted her backpack, but inside she felt a small flutter, the uncomfortable kind that comes when something in the air feels different, like a shift in mood that you can't see but you can sense anyway. She told herself not to assume anything, yet she couldn't ignore the silence that settled once the last classmate left, the kind of silence that fills a room when something important is about to happen. And as she turned slightly to go, Ethan finally lifted his head and their eyes met, not in the casual way they sometimes passed glances during group projects or when he held the door for her, but in a way that made her stop completely, because his eyes held something she didn't expect to see, a mix of worry, determination, and something softer that she couldn't name, something that made her heart jump in a quick, confusing beat. She opened her mouth to ask if he needed help, but he spoke first, his voice low and careful, asking, "Lila, can you stay for a minute?" And the simplicity of those words felt heavier than they should have, almost like he had been practicing them and was afraid they would come out wrong. And even though she didn't understand why he asked, she nodded automatically, because something inside her told her this moment mattered. She walked back toward her desk, not fully sure what she was doing, but unable to leave, and the atmosphere around them changed the second the door's latch clicked shut, leaving the two of them in a classroom that suddenly felt too big and too quiet, the kind of quiet where every breath seemed louder, every movement more noticeable. Ethan slowly stood up, sliding his notebook aside with a shaky breath, and Lila realized he wasn't avoiding her. He looked like he was building the courage to speak, and that alone made her chest tighten with nerves she didn't expect. She had seen Ethan laugh loudly with his friends, joke with teachers, and carry himself with a confidence she always wished she had, but the boy standing in front of her was different, quieter, more vulnerable, as if he was carrying something he couldn't hide anymore. Lila felt a sudden rush of empathy, mixed with a strange nervous spark she didn't quite understand, and she tried to steady her breathing as she asked gently, "Are you okay?" But Ethan only gave a small, fragile smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes, and said, "I've been trying to talk to you," before stopping, almost like he ran out of courage halfway through, leaving the sentence hanging in the air between them. Lila felt confusion twist inside her because out of all the things she expected, that wasn't one of them. Ethan barely talked to her outside of class, yet he sounded like this conversation mattered deeply, like he had been carrying it around for weeks, and her mind raced with questions she couldn't form out loud. She shifted her weight, waiting for him to continue, feeling a warmth in her chest she didn't know how to describe, because there was something strangely meaningful about being the person someone stayed behind for, especially someone like Ethan, someone people noticed, someone who didn't normally hesitate. He ran a hand through his hair in a nervous habit she had never seen him do before, then took a quiet step closer, not enough to make her uncomfortable, but enough that she could see the tension in his jaw and the uncertainty in his eyes. And Lila felt her own pulse quicken at the intensity of his silence. The classroom lights hummed softly. The hallway noise faded completely, and Lila suddenly realized this moment was bigger than it seemed. Something was going on with Ethan, something emotional, something he didn't want to talk about where anyone else could hear. The air felt slightly heavier, almost dramatic but in a quiet, real way, the kind that comes before someone finally admits the truth they've been keeping too long. And Lila's breath hitched with anticipation even though she didn't know what she was waiting for. She wished the right words would come to her, something to make him feel safe enough to speak, but all she could manage was a soft, "Ethan, what's going on?" And instead of answering, he took another slow breath, looking at the floor and then back at her like he was choosing each second carefully, and the moment stretched out in a way that made her stomach tighten. She didn't know why she felt so nervous or why this moment mattered so much, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something important, something personal, was about to be said, and without meaning to, she braced herself emotionally, her heart thumping harder as Ethan finally lifted his eyes and met her gaze again, this time with a look that made her entire body tense with anticipation, and in that instant, Lila knew the quiet wasn't just quiet, it was the space before someone tells you something that can change everything. Ethan stood in front of Lila like someone carrying a truth that had become too heavy, his breath uneven as he tried to start speaking, and Lila felt her heart tighten because she had never seen him look so unsure. He usually moved through school with quiet confidence, greeting people with easy smiles, but now his hands fidgeted at his sides and his eyes kept shifting between her face and the floor as if he was afraid of saying the wrong thing, and the tension in the room sharpened her focus, making her suddenly aware of how close they were standing. She waited, trying not to rush him, but the longer he stayed silent, the more she felt the weight of something unspoken pressing against the moment, and finally he let out a slow breath and whispered, "I've been trying to talk to you for weeks," in a voice so honest it made her chest warm with surprise, because she could not imagine someone like Ethan, popular, friendly, surrounded by people, struggling to talk to someone like her. Lila had always felt invisible, the kind of person who blended into the background without effort, the girl who quietly took notes and kept to herself, so hearing him admit he wanted to talk felt unreal, almost dreamlike, but she grounded herself, reminding her racing heart that he was still standing there waiting for her reaction. She nodded slightly to show she was listening, and Ethan continued, his voice shaking only a little, "Every time I try, something stops me," and Lila felt a sudden rush of curiosity mixed with nervousness, wondering what could possibly stop someone like him, but he didn't pause long enough for her to ask, instead stepping closer, not intimidatingly, but with a kind of emotional honesty she wasn't used to seeing, his eyes lifting to hers with a vulnerability that made her breath catch. She felt the air shift again, the silence becoming deeper, holding the tension between them like a thread stretched tight, and Ethan swallowed hard before adding, "I didn't want to mess anything up," and those words landed in her heart like something unexpected because they hinted at something personal, something delicate, something that mattered to him, and Lila felt her pulse pick up as the meaning slowly sank in. She tried to answer, but words didn't come immediately, her mind racing through every interaction she could remember, his smiles, his small gestures, the way he always checked if she understood assignments, the times he stayed close when she looked overwhelmed, moments she thought were just kindness but now suddenly felt different under the weight of his confession. Her throat tightened as she whispered, "Mess what up?" But Ethan only pressed his lips together, clearly struggling to find the right words, and Lila watched the conflict in his expression, fear mixed with hope, courage mixed with hesitation, and for the first time she realized that whatever he wanted to say was not casual, not something he could joke about, but something that had been sitting on his heart for a long time. She felt the room close in around them, not in a suffocating way, but in a way that made everything else disappear, the desks, the whiteboard, the fading sunlight through the windows, until it was just the two of them in a moment that felt strangely fragile. Ethan finally lifted a hand to rub the back of his neck, a nervous habit she found unexpectedly endearing, and said softly, "You're different, Lila, and every time I try to talk, I get scared I'll say the wrong thing," and Lila felt her cheeks warm with a mix of shock and a slow-growing tenderness she couldn't hide. Being called different by someone like Ethan didn't feel like an insult, it felt like he had been paying attention in ways she never imagined, and that thought sent her heart spinning. She wanted to ask what he meant, but her voice stayed trapped in her throat, leaving her silent but wide-eyed, and Ethan seemed to take her silence as permission to go on, because he added with careful softness, "I didn't want to ruin the small moments we already have," referring to the simple interactions they shared, the quiet good mornings, the shared notes, the accidental but warm eye contact, and Lila felt a wave of emotion so strong it made her hands tremble slightly, because she never thought those moments mattered to him, yet he was speaking like each one had meant something. She opened her mouth to speak again, but before she could, a faint voice echoed from the hallway calling Ethan's name, and though the sound was distant, It made her flinch because it reminded her they weren't in some private world but in a school that kept moving around them. Ethan didn't turn toward the door, didn't react at all, as if whoever was calling didn't matter compared to the moment he was finally brave enough to step into. His focus stayed locked on her, steady and sincere, and Lila felt a spark of something warm in her chest, a kind of reassurance she didn't know she needed, because it told her that whatever he was trying to say, whatever truth he was risking, it wasn't casual or impulsive, it was real. She took a small breath, feeling both overwhelmed and drawn in, and whispered his name gently, hoping it would help him continue. But before either of them could say another word, the sound from the hallway faded and the classroom returned to stillness, leaving them suspended again in quiet tension. Lila felt every second stretching long and emotional, her heart beating with anticipation and confusion and something new she couldn't label yet, and she knew, without being told, that whatever Ethan was trying to confess was something that would change the way she looked at him forever. The moment Ethan finally spoke, the whole room seemed to shrink around them, as if everything else faded until only his voice mattered, and when he quietly said, "I like you," the words hit Lila so suddenly that her breath caught, because they weren't dramatic or loud or rehearsed, they were simple, honest, and full of a warmth she wasn't prepared for, and she felt her heart shake with a mix of disbelief and something softer rising in her chest. She stared at him, struggling to process how someone she admired from a distance could feel something like that for her, and Ethan looked terrified after speaking, like he had opened a door he couldn't close again, his fingers curling slightly as if bracing for rejection, and the raw vulnerability in his expression made Lila's chest ache. She wanted to speak, to reassure him, to understand what this meant, but her thoughts tangled too fast, memories flashing through her mind, the shared glances he always held a second longer. The quiet moments when he checked if she was okay, the times he stayed close during group work, those tiny gestures she told herself meant nothing, yet now each one returned with new meaning, as if she had been missing the truth hidden between them all semester. Ethan slowly lifted his eyes again, his voice shaking slightly as he added, "You don't have to say anything right now." And Lila felt a strange wave of tenderness wash over her because he wasn't pushing her or expecting instant answers. He was just being honest, opening his heart carefully like he was afraid of overwhelming her. He took a small step back, giving her space, and said quietly, "I just needed you to know." Keeping it inside, it was starting to hurt, and those last words hit her deeper than she expected, because hearing someone admit that caring about her caused them pain felt both shocking and strangely comforting, reminding her that emotions could be heavy even when they were gentle. Lila felt something shift inside herself, a mix of fear, warmth, excitement, and confusion, all colliding too quickly, making her chest tighten and her palms grow warm, and she tried to start a sentence, "Ethan, I..." But the words stuck to her throat because she didn't want to say something clumsy or something she didn't fully understand yet. She took a step closer instead, letting her presence speak for her when her voice wouldn't cooperate, and Ethan noticed instantly, his breath catching in a way that told her he felt the moment just as intensely as she did. She searched his face, trying to understand the depth of what he just confessed, and she realized he wasn't playing around, wasn't saying this because of a passing crush. His feelings were real, steady, and built slowly over months of quiet attention she never realized he had been giving her. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore, it felt like the room was holding a fragile truth, waiting to see what would happen next, and Lila felt herself letting go of some of the shyness she carried for years, because Ethan wasn't seeing her as invisible or ordinary, he was seeing her as someone worth risking something for, and that alone made her heart open in ways she didn't expect. She finally whispered, "Ethan," again, this time with more emotion, ready to tell him something honest, something that might change everything. But before she could continue, the classroom door creaked open loudly and both of them jolted slightly, turning instinctively toward the sound. The janitor stepped in with a gentle apology, not realizing he had interrupted a moment that wasn't meant for anyone else to witness, and Ethan stepped back immediately, his expression shifting into a careful mask as if protecting what he had just shared, while Lila felt the moment slip from her fingers like a delicate thread that snapped too soon. The interruption broke the intimacy of the silence, pulling them back into the real world, fluorescent lights, evening cleaning routines, footsteps echoing down the hallway, and for a second Lila felt a strange sense of loss, because the words she had been ready to say didn't feel as easy to voice with. Someone else in the room. Ethan shot her a small look, silent but full of longing and uncertainty, as if asking without words whether she was okay, whether the moment they shared was still alive or slipping away, and Lila felt something steady inside her answer for her, reminding her that a confession like his didn't disappear just because someone opened a door. The janitor waved them out kindly, eyes focused on his work, unaware of how emotional the air felt between the two teenagers standing frozen near the desks, and Ethan nodded politely before turning to Lila again, his expression soft, hopeful, and slightly scared, like he was waiting for any sign she hadn't been overwhelmed. She didn't know how to say everything she wanted to say yet, not while the moment was broken, but she managed a small, warm smile that made Ethan's shoulders relax slightly, and without speaking she let him see that she wasn't running away from what he confessed, that she wasn't upset or frightened, she was simply finding her voice. As they stepped out of the classroom together, the door clicking shut behind them, the hallway lights reflected softly on the floor, and Lila felt the echo of Ethan's confession in every step she took, a quiet reminder that something in her world had just changed forever, and even though she didn't know exactly what she would say next, she knew the story between them was far from over, and that the truth Ethan had shared was already pulling her heart towards something new and unexpectedly beautiful. The hallway felt quieter than usual as Lila and Ethan stepped out of the classroom, the door closing softly behind them like a boundary between what had just happened and everything that waited ahead, and for a moment they both walked without speaking, their footsteps echoing lightly on the polished floor, each of them trying to steady the rush of emotions still swirling around them. Lila felt her heart beating fast, not from fear but from the overwhelming mix of warmth and confusion that came from hearing Ethan admit something she never expected. And Ethan walked beside her with a kind of gentle tension in his shoulders, as if he wanted to give her space but was afraid that too much distance would make the moment fade away. The hallway lights glowed faintly as the school prepared to close for the day, and the growing quiet around them made the air feel softer, almost intimate, like the world had slowed down just for the two of them, giving them time to breathe and figure out what came next. Lila finally gathered enough courage to look at him, noticing the way he kept glancing at her quickly then looking away, each glance filled with worry and hope, and she felt a tug on her heart because she could see how deeply his confession meant to him. His vulnerability wasn't something he showed often, and it made her want to treat this moment with care. She slowed her steps just a little, letting him know she wasn't rushing away, and Ethan slowed too, almost instantly, as if he had been waiting for some sign that she was still with him emotionally. She took a small breath, still feeling the weight of her unspoken words, and finally said softly, "I didn't know you felt that way," her voice gentle but steady, and Ethan stopped walking at those words, turning toward her as if every muscle in his body reacted at once, his eyes searching her face for any hint of rejection or fear. Lila didn't let him guess for long. She offered a small, warm smile, the kind that wasn't loud but was honest, and added, "But I'm glad you told me," and she watched his shoulders lower slightly, a quiet relief spreading across his expression like a wave washing away hours of silent worry. He didn't smile right away, he just breathed, deeply, like he needed that one moment to believe she wasn't pulling away, and once that breath settled, he looked at her with the kind of sincerity that made her chest feel full, then whispered, "So, what now?" And the simplicity of the question touched her more than she expected, because it held no pressure, no demand, only openness, only hope. She thought about it for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision, and she realized that whatever she said would shape everything that happened next, so she chose honesty, the same honesty he had given her, and replied, "Now we take it slow, and see where this goes," and the words felt right, gentle, safe, like a promise she was ready to make even if she didn't have every answer yet. Ethan finally smiled, a soft, grateful smile that held more emotion than words could describe, and she noticed the way the tension left his posture, replaced by something warm and hopeful, and in that moment it felt like something delicate had begun between them, a new understanding forming quietly but strongly. They continued walking together, the building around them settling into its end-of-day silence, and as they reached the main doors, the late afternoon sky painted everything in soft gold, adding a peaceful glow to the moment. Lila pushed open the door, feeling the cool air brush her face, and Ethan walked beside her, close enough that their arms almost touched, not on purpose but naturally, like they had already learned to walk together in this new way. Each step felt lighter than the last, And even though neither of them said much, the silence didn't feel heavy, it felt full, like something new was quietly unfolding between them. At one point their hands brushed, just lightly, barely more than a whisper of contact, but the spark it sent through Lila's chest surprised her, and she saw Ethan glance down at their hands then look away quickly, his cheeks turning the faintest shade of pink, a reaction that made her heart warm in a slow, tender way. She didn't move away, and he didn't either, letting the moment linger naturally, no pressure, no rush, just a quiet understanding that something meaningful had started. As they reached the school gates, the sky stretched wide above them, and Lila felt a calm settle over her, the kind that came when something in life finally made sense, even if she hadn't realized she was waiting for it. Ethan stopped again, turning to face her fully this time, his expression thoughtful and gentle, and he said, "I don't want to mess anything up," echoing the same worry he confessed earlier, but now his voice carried more hope than fear, and Lila stepped closer, not too close, just enough to show him she wasn't going anywhere, and answered softly, "You won't, as long as we're honest," and those simple words felt like a promise they both needed. He nodded slowly, a quiet understanding passing between them, and for the first time since his confession, Lila felt completely grounded, realizing that whatever this was, whatever they were starting, it didn't need definitions or rushed decisions, it just needed patience, care, and the courage they had both already shown. They said goodbye with gentle smiles, not dramatic or intense, but meaningful in a way that left both of them standing still for a moment after turning away, each replaying the conversation in their minds, each feeling the new beginning settling into their hearts. As Lila walked toward home, she felt lighter than she had in months, her steps soft but filled with excitement she tried not to show on her face, and she knew Ethan was walking away with the same quiet glow, both of them aware that their lives had shifted, just a little, just enough to start something tender and real, something they were both willing to explore slowly, carefully, and with their hearts open to whatever came next.